officer of Merk Investments. Just did a little broadcast and there was no audio. So let's hope that the audio works this time around. Let me just see. I still don't see here the audio pickup on the other end of the spectrum. All right. As you might be able to gauge, I'm using a new gadget here. Here we go. Let me see. I hope this audio works this time around. I am giving you input today on kind of three topics that are somewhat related. First is price of gold is breaking out here. We're at 1942 right now, up 2.1%. Silver doing even stronger, up 160 or 7% at 24.37. All of this in the backdrop of a broadly weaker dollar. The strongest currency is the Swedish crown, up 1.3%. The Swiss franc is the weakest, up quote unquote only 13 basis points versus the dollar. So big move here. The yen also finally breaking a little stronger here, 105.15. All of that in the bond market, it's fairly muted. 10 years flat, 30 years flat right now. Tom Keene gave me a shout out this morning on a chart that I tweeted. You have seen that where I've correlated the 10-year real yields to treasuries, and it, in my view at least, it makes sense to correlate the price of gold to real yields, that is yields after inflation, and the way you calculate that with a 10-year is by looking at the 10-year rate and then the tips. And so with that, you have a market-based rate. It's a forward-looking rate, obviously, because you're looking at the 10-year. But a lot of people look at inflation, short-term inflation. Oh, there's no correlation between gold and inflation. Well, if you look at a 10-year real rate, there is a correlation. And the charts I often tweet are kind of last 2 years or so. The correlation is very strong. If you look since 95, correlation is a little weaker. Obviously, this is not investment advice of any sort or imagination, but if you think about it, if you hold cash and get rewarded for it, meaning you get interest that's on a real basis compensating you, why would you hold something that doesn't hold you any, give you any interest or dividend? And then gold tends to do well in environments where you don't get compensated for that, and when you have trillions in expenses and by the government, then it kind of makes sense that they have an incentive to minimize real yields, and that's precisely what's happening here. Now, obviously, there's no forecast of what's going to happen to the price of gold. I can't do that because I am being regulated in my speech here, so I can't do things that other people on the blogosphere are doing. You'll see a big difference in how people who are regulated talk versus those who are not. And then obviously there are some who are regulated who still talk in a way that they think is fine with their compliance, and that's obviously up to them, and it's however they want to do it. Now, part of the reason price of gold is up because people are spending a lot of money, or governments are spending a lot of money that isn't deployed in the most effective manner. When I've said in the outset of the crisis, if you spend $1 trillion, you might want to spend it on reopening the economy. And with that, I didn't mean to rip open the mandate, but devising ways that we can safely do it. Now, we do some of that, obviously, with vaccine development and calls to wear masks or whatever it may want to be. But we do a lot more than that, and by all means, there's a good reason why politicians to choose to do that. But as far as the value of the currency is concerned and gold is concerned, those are not the most effective ways to kind of utilize money. Then, since we're talking about COVID here indirectly anyway, a few tidbits here. One is the National Security Advisor has been diagnosed with COVID. And the context here is, I read Bolton's book. I don't encourage anybody to read that, no matter what your view is on Trump or Bolton. Bolton obviously has very strong views on social policies, very strong strategic views. Wasn't too surprising that he would get miffed at least from his perspective, lack of strategic direction on the foreign policy. But what he does do in his book, he gives amazing insight about the inner workings and how the National Security Advisor's office is working. And of course, he may have had his personal style, Bolton, but it gives still amazing insight to the inner workings of an administration and specifically the Trump administration. But even if you kind of take out the Trump element to it, I do think that one learns a lot on how this office is working. And the reason I mention this context, of course, is because Bolton had a lot of in-person contact with Trump, and if the current national security advisor has anything close to that, then obviously, and then Trump may have been very good early on in fighting the outbreak. Austria had one of the early hotbeds in some ski resorts. They do have a populist government, but populism or not, were perfectly willing, able to encourage people and to impose significant restrictions on people, and including wearing of masks, but they appear to have been complacent. Across the border in Germany, they had a major outbreak in a big farm. Almost 200 people, farm workers, apparently have been infected. What they do there is they've built physical barriers to quarantine people off. And so different countries use different methods. Um, uh, I had not heard of kind of physical cordoning off, and apparently even